The pepper spray burned my eyes as much as his. My fingers clenched the canister, one more shot left. The alley stank of wet concrete and fear. He didn't want my purse, he wanted my phone. The one with Julian's messages. The one that held my entire secret life. His gloved hand lunged again, and I realized this wasn't a robbery. It was a warning. The keychain he dropped glinted under the streetlight, a rare indie band logo, the same one I'd given Sarah's brother last Christmas. My breath froze. Someone knew. Someone was watching, and Julian was the only person I could trust, if he even existed. The scent of scorched coffee and exhaust fumes clung to the humid Chicago air. Maya Sterling wove through the midday rush, her thumb dancing across the glowing glass of her phone. A chime vibrated against her palm, signaling another message from Julian. "You inhabit my thoughts like a recurring melody," the screen read. A smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. She ignored the shoulder checks from hurried businessmen and the rhythmic hiss of a passing bus's air brakes. To Maya, the city existed only as a blurred backdrop of gray concrete and screeching sirens. Julian's words provided the only sharp edges in her universe. He breathed life into her routine, offering a sanctuary built of pixels and shared secrets. She typed a response, oblivious to the puddle splashing against her leather boots or the shadow stretching from a nearby alcove. She lived for these bursts of connection, the way the phone felt warm in her hand, like a heartbeat she could carry in her pocket. Every message was a high-resolution anchor in a world that felt increasingly out of focus. As she stepped off the main thoroughfare, the transition from the sun-drenched sidewalk to the mouth of the alley happened in a heartbeat. The roar of the loop faded, replaced by the drip of a leaky pipe and the metallic tang of damp brick. Maya's boots clicked against the uneven pavement, a rhythmic count she kept in the back of her mind. 1, 2, 3. She was heading toward the bistro to meet Sarah, but Julian's latest poem held her gaze fixed on the screen. The blue light was a shield against the grime of the city, until the shield was shattered by a sudden, violent movement. A figure lunged from behind a rusted dumpster, boots scraping against the grit with a sound like sandpaper on bone. The man wore a heavy nylon mask that smelled of stale sweat and old rain. He didn't look at her face. His eyes were locked on the glowing device in her hand. "Give it over," he rasped, his voice a jagged edge that sliced through the quiet of the alley. His fingers, clad in thin work gloves, clawed for the phone. Maya didn't scream. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, but her instincts, honed by years of urban caution, took over. She felt the weight of her heavy leather portfolio bag hanging from her shoulder. Instead of letting go, she gripped the phone tighter, pulling it against her chest. As the mugger lunged again, his fingers grazing her sleeve, Maya's hand found the small canister clipped to her keychain. She squeezed the trigger. A stream of orange mist hissed into the air, catching the man square in the eyes. He recoiled, a choked howl escaping his throat as the chemical sting filled the narrow space. The smell of pepper and burning vinegar clouded the air. Maya didn't wait for him to recover. She bolted toward the light of the main street, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her feet hit the sidewalk, the familiar roar of traffic welcoming her back. She didn't look back until she reached the heavy glass doors of the bistro, her fingers still trembling so hard she could barely push them open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of roasted garlic and expensive wine. Sarah Jenkins was already seated at a corner table, her head tilted to the left as she scrolled through her own device. When she saw Maya, she stood up, her face a mask of concern that seemed to melt into the warm lighting of the room. "Maya, you're white as a sheet. What happened?" Sarah's voice was soft, a contrast to the violence of the alley. She reached out, her hand steady as she guided Maya into a chair. Maya tried to speak, but her throat felt like it was coated in dust. Someone. In the alley. He tried to take my phone. Sarah's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them before she leaned in close. Your phone? Not your wallet? That's strange, babe. Real talk. This city's getting uglier by the second. She squeezed Maya's hand, her grip just a bit too tight. You're vibrating like a faulty wire. Drink some water. You're safe now. I've got you. As Maya sipped the ice water, the clink of the cubes against the glass sounding like tiny bells, Sarah began to talk. She spoke of the dangers of the physical world, the unpredictability of the streets, and the way people could disappear in the blink of an eye. It's why Julian is so important, Sarah whispered, her unblinking gaze fixed on Maya. He's the only thing in your life that's clean, Maya. No dirt, no masks, no hidden corners. He's the only one who can really protect you from all this noise. You should message him. Tell him you're okay. He's the only one who needs to know where you are. Maya felt a wave of relief wash over her, a false sense of security blooming in the heat of the bistro. Sarah was right. The world was a mess of shadows and orange mist. But Julian was a constant, a digital North Star. She reached into her bag to pull out her phone, but as she shifted her weight, something hard and metallic hit the floor with a sharp clack. Maya looked down. Lying near the leg of the table was a keychain. It was a heavy, neon green plastic disc with a logo she knew better than her own signature. A rare indie band called the Static Hearts. Her breath hitched. She had bought that exact keychain 3 years ago at a basement show in Wicker Park. There were only 50 made. She had given it to Mark, Sarah's brother, for his 21st birthday. A cold prickle danced across Maya's skin. The mugger. The struggle in the alley. He must have dropped it when she sprayed him. She looked at the keychain, then up at Sarah, who was still smiling that warm, sisterly smile. The bistro, once a sanctuary, suddenly felt like a cage. The smell of garlic turned nauseating, and the high-pitched hum of the refrigerator in the back began to vibrate in Maya's teeth. The world was tilting, and for the first time, the resolution of her life was beginning to break. The days that followed felt like a slow-motion collapse. Maya retreated into her apartment, the 42 steps from the street to her door feeling like a gauntlet. She counted them under her breath, a rhythmic chant to keep the panic at bay. 39, 40, 41, 42. Inside, the air smelled of ozone and stale air. She kept the blinds drawn, the only light coming from the 3 monitors on her desk, which cast a ghostly blue hue over her face. Julian's messages became more frequent, but the tone had shifted. The poetry was gone, replaced by a frantic, jagged urgency. Maya, listen to me. The text read, arriving in the familiar burst of 3. I'm in trouble. The project in Santiago, it blew up. They're tracking my movement. I'm being followed. Maya's fingers flew across the keyboard. Who? Julian, tell me where you are. I can help. No, he replied. If they find our link, they find you. You have to delete everything, every photo, every log, every scrap of us. It's the only way to keep you off their radar. Do it now, for me. Asterisk. The request felt like a physical blow. Those logs were the only evidence that she existed in his world. To delete them was to erase the last 6 months of her life. She looked at the screen, the cursor blinking like a taunt. She thought of the green keychain in her drawer, the one she hadn't told Sarah about. Doubts were like weeds, cracking the foundation of her trust. Instead of hitting delete, Maya opened a secondary window. She was a visual genius, a woman who could see the ghosting in a low-res image from across the room. She decided to dive deeper. She navigated to an old photography forum where they had first met, her hands steady despite the hammering in her chest. She began to pull the metadata from the images Julian had sent her. The sunsets, the blurred cityscapes of South America. As she worked, a high-pitched whine began to emit from her speakers, a digital shriek that made her wince. Suddenly, her screen flickered, the blue light turning a bruised, sickly purple. A window popped up, but it wasn't a message from Julian. It was a blank black box. Then, her phone rang. The sound was a standard ringtone, but it felt like a gunshot in the quiet room. She picked it up, her thumb hovering over the accept button. "Hello?" she whispered. A voice came through the line, but it wasn't human. It was a metallic, garbled mess, the pitch shifting up and down like a failing engine. "You're looking where you shouldn't, Maya," the voice rasped. "The static is watching. Stay in the frame, or we'll crop you out." The line went dead. Maya dropped the phone, the glass screen cracking against the hardwood floor. The smell of ozone in the room intensified, a sharp, electric tang that made her eyes water. She scrambled toward the door, checking the locks. 3 deadbolts. She leaned her forehead against the cold wood, the hum of the city outside sounding like a predator's growl. She needed to leave. She needed to find Sarah. But as she turned back toward her bedroom, she stopped. There, lying in the center of her pristine white pillow, was a single black crow feather. It hadn't been there an hour ago. The windows were locked. The door had been bolted. Yet the feather sat there, a dark, jagged mark against the fabric. Julian's signature. Or a warning. Maya felt the air leave her lungs. Her sanctuary was no longer hers. Someone had been inside. Someone had touched her bed, smelled her air, and left a piece of the void behind. The walls of the apartment seemed to lean inward, the shadows stretching toward her like skeletal fingers. She grabbed her bag, the weight of it a small comfort, and fled. She didn't count the steps this time. She just ran. The Washington Blue Line station was a cavern of screeching metal and damp concrete. Maya stood near the edge of the platform, her eyes darting between the dark tunnel and the crowd of commuters. Everyone looked like a threat. The man in the gray suit, the woman with the oversized headphones, the teenager leaning against a pillar. The floor began to tremble, a low-frequency shudder that moved up through the soles of her boots. The train was coming. A gust of hot, stale wind pushed out of the tunnel, smelling of grease and old electricity. Suddenly, a hand slammed into the small of her back. It wasn't a nudge or a bump. It was a calculated, violent shove. Maya's feet left the ground. She felt the void of the tracks opening up beneath her, the silver rails gleaming like knives in the dim light. The roar of the oncoming train filled her ears, a deafening mechanical scream. With a desperate animal cry, Maya twisted in midair, her fingers clawing for anything solid. Her right hand caught the edge of the cold metal railing that separated the platform sections. The iron bit into her palm, tearing the skin, but she held on. Her legs dangled over the pit as the train roared past, a blur of silver and glass just inches from her face. The heat from the engines scorched her cheeks. Commuters screamed. Someone grabbed her under the arms and hauled her back onto the concrete. Maya collapsed, her hands raw and bleeding, the copper scent of her own blood mixing with the ozone of the station. She looked up, searching for a face, a parka, anything. But the crowd was a chaotic sea of motion. "Did you see him?" she gasped to the man who had helped her. The person who pushed me? The man, a weary-looking office worker, shook his head. I didn't see anyone, lady. I think you just tripped. The floor is slick. Maya looked down. A wet floor sign stood 5 feet away, but the tiles beneath her were bone dry and cracked. There was no water, only the lie. She dragged herself to her feet, her heart rhythm shattered. She needed to see Sarah. Sarah would know what to do. Sarah was the only one left. An hour later, Maya sat in Sarah's living room, her hands wrapped in thick white gauze. Sarah was pacing, her head tilted so far to the left it looked painful. I told you, Maya, Sarah said, her voice rising in a frantic tremolo. The city is eating you alive. You're not safe here. You're like a cricket's ghost, just a sound with no body left to protect. Maya froze. The tea she was holding slopped over the rim of the cup, stinging her raw palms. A cricket's ghost. The phrase echoed in her mind, vibrating with a terrible clarity. Julian had used that exact phrase in his email that morning. I feel like a cricket's ghost, Maya, haunting a world that doesn't want me. It was an obscure, haunting idiom. Not something two people would say by accident on the same day. Maya looked at Sarah. Really looked at her. She saw the way Sarah's hand twitched, as if she were checking a box in a hidden ledger. She saw the intensity in Sarah's unblinking eyes. What did you just say? Maya's voice was a low whisper. Sarah stopped pacing. She smiled, but the warmth didn't reach her eyes. I said you're fragile, babe. Like a ghost. Why are you looking at me like that? I need to go to the bathroom, Maya said, her voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. She walked down the hallway, her mind a whirlwind of static and realization. She didn't go to the bathroom. She stepped into Sarah's small home office. On the desk sat a sleek black tablet. Without thinking, Maya reached into her bag and pulled out a small, adhesive tracking chip she had bought for her luggage months ago. She pressed it onto the underside of the tablet's casing, her fingers trembling. She had to know. If Sarah was Julian, if the mugger was Mark, if the push at the station was a performance, then the world wasn't just out of focus. It was a curated nightmare. Maya? Sarah's voice called from the hallway. Closer now. You okay in there? Maya stepped out, smoothing her hair. Fine, just a dizzy spell. You're right, Sarah. Maybe we should go away for a bit, like you suggested. The cabin in Lake Geneva? Sarah's face lit up, a flash of triumph that sent a chill down Maya's spine. Yes, exactly. A healing weekend, just the two of us. No phones, no noise, just the woods and the water. Maya nodded, her heart counting the beats. 1, 2, 3. She was walking into the mouth of the wolf, but this time she was carrying a light. The drive to Lake Geneva was a study in mounting dread. The sky over the Wisconsin border turned the color of a fresh bruise, heavy clouds rolling in from the west. By the time they reached the winding dirt road leading to the cabin, the first cracks of thunder were echoing through the dense stands of pine. The cabin was a hulking structure of dark logs, tucked away in a hollow that sunlight seemed to avoid. The air smelled of damp earth and rot. As they stepped inside, the rain began in earnest. A violent, Midwestern deluge that turned the road into a river of mud within minutes. Well, Sarah said, tossing her keys onto the heavy oak table. Looks like we're tucked in. The road is probably washed out by now. No getting out until the storm breaks. Maya nodded, her eyes scanning the room. The ceiling was low, the heavy beams pressing down like the lid of a coffin. A wood stove in the corner cranked out a sweltering, oppressive heat that made the air feel like thick wool. I'll make some tea, Sarah said, heading toward the kitchen. Maya waited until she heard the rattle of the kettle. She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over the tracking app. The signal from Sarah's tablet was strong. But as Maya looked at the screen, her breath caught. There was a second signal. A digital pulse, identical to Julian's unique signature, was transmitting from within the cabin. It wasn't in the kitchen with Sarah. It was coming from the back bedroom. Maya's pulse hammered. Julian wasn't in South America. He wasn't a world away. He was mere feet from her, a ghost made of wires and lies. She moved toward the kitchen, her boots silent on the braided rug. Sarah was standing by the stove, her back to the room. She was humming a low, mournful tune, a funeral dirge that Maya recognized from her mother's kitchen. "Sarah," Maya said, her voice steady. Sarah didn't turn around. "The water's almost boiling, babe." "Julian is here, isn't he?" The humming stopped. The only sound in the room was the frantic drumming of the rain against the roof and the hiss of the kettle. Sarah turned slowly. The friendly, protective mask was gone. In its place was a cold, clinical detachment that made her look like a stranger. "You always were too observant for your own good, Maya," Sarah said. Her voice was flat, devoid of its usual percussive energy. "That's why I picked you. You see the details? You just don't know how to put them together. You created him," Maya whispered. "The messages, the poems, the mugging. It was all you." Sarah stepped forward, the heavy iron skillet in her hand catching the dim light. "I didn't just create him. I perfected him. I gave you everything you wanted. A soulmate who never leaves, who never judges, who only sees you. I was saving you from the mess of the real world. You tried to kill me at the station. I tried to wake you up," Sarah screamed, the sudden volume making Maya flinch. "I needed you to see that the world is dangerous. I needed you to need me." Sarah lunged. The skillet whistled through the air, narrowly missing Maya's head and smashing into a wooden chair with a bone-jarring thud. Maya scrambled back, her boots slipping on the polished floor. She grabbed a heavy ceramic vase from the sideboard and hurled it. It shattered against Sarah's shoulder, but the woman didn't even flinch. She was a force of nature, fueled by a decade of resentment and a twisted sense of ownership. "You're not going anywhere, Maya," Sarah hissed, swinging the skillet again. This time, the edge caught Maya's ribs. The pain was an explosion of white light, an electric shock that stole her breath. Maya fell against the wall, her lungs burning. She looked up to see Sarah standing over her, the skillet raised for a final blow. "It's already done," Sarah said, a manic glint in her eyes. "I've drained your accounts. I've sent the emails from your computer to the precinct. By tomorrow, Maya Sterling will be the prime suspect in a series of digital thefts. And Julian? Julian will provide the final testimony." Sarah pulled a small device from her pocket and pressed a button. A screen flickered to life. On it was Julian, the man from the photos, his face clear now, lit by a soft, artificial glow. He was speaking, his voice deep and soulful. But the movements of his mouth were slightly off, a 1% shift that only Maya would notice. "I'm so sorry," the deepfake Julian said, his eyes filled with simulated tears. "Maya made me do it. She threatened to expose me if I didn't help her move the money. She's not who you think she is." The betrayal was a physical weight, a stone in Maya's chest. Her love, her sanctuary, was being used as the weapon to destroy her. "You see?" Sarah whispered, leaning in close. The smell of her perfume, lavender and stale sweat, was suffocating. "Nobody will believe you. You're just a girl who lost her mind in the wires, and I'm the only one who will stay to pick up the pieces." Before Maya could scream, Sarah's hand shot out, gripping her throat. With a strength born of madness, she dragged Maya toward the cellar door. Maya kicked and clawed, her nails drawing blood on Sarah's arms, but the iron grip didn't loosen. The cellar door creaked open, revealing a dark, yawning pit that smelled of damp limestone. Sarah shoved her down the stairs. Maya tumbled into the dark, her shoulder hitting the cold stone floor with a sickening pop. The heavy wooden door slammed shut. The 3 deadbolts slid home. Clack, clack, clack. "Sleep well, babe?" Sarah's voice drifted through the wood, muffled and distorted. "I've got to go send your suicide note. Your parents are going to be so devastated." Maya lay in the dark, the silence of the cellar more terrifying than the storm. She was alone. Her name was a crime, her heart was a lie, and the world had finally, completely, gone black. Subverted beat 4.1. The darkness of the cellar was absolute. A thick, velvety weight that seemed to press the very air from Maya's lungs. She lay on the cold stone, her shoulder throbbing with a rhythmic, stabbing pain. Above her, the floorboards creaked as Sarah moved through the cabin, the sound of a predator pacing its cage. Maya forced herself to breathe. 1, 2, 3. She had to be smart. She was a designer. She understood how systems were built, and more importantly, how they broke. She felt around the floor until her fingers touched the cold metal of her bag. Sarah had been so confident in her victory that she hadn't bothered to search it. Inside, Maya found her small metal ruler and a heavy, industrial-grade flashlight. She unscrewed the back of the flashlight, the batteries sliding into her palm with a reassuring weight. She knew the cellar door was controlled by a modern electronic lock. Sarah's one concession to the smart world she claimed to despise. Phase 1. Smart decision. Maya crawled to the door. She could see the faint glow of the lock's internal light through the gap in the wood. She knew that if she could create a short circuit between the battery terminals and the lock's sensor, the system would default to an open state. It was a standard safety feature in high-end electronic bolts, a fail-safe for fires. She carefully stripped a thin wire from her charging cable using her teeth, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm. She was competent. She was precise. This was the logical way out. Phase 2. False positive. She pressed the wire against the battery and jammed the metal ruler into the lock's housing. There was a sharp crack, a tiny blue spark that illuminated the cellar for a fraction of a second. The smell of ozone, now a scent of hope, filled the air. Click. The sound of the deadbolts retracting was the most beautiful melody Maya had ever heard. She pushed the door. It swung open on silent hinges. She was out. She had outsmarted the monster. She felt a surge of adrenaline, a warm glow of triumph that masked her pain. She would slip into the woods, reach the road, and find help. Phase 3. The crack. She crept up the stairs, her eyes adjusting to the dim light of the cabin. Sarah was nowhere to be seen. The front door was ajar, the rain now a soft, rhythmic patter. Maya stepped onto the porch, the cool air hitting her face like a blessing. But then she stopped. Something was wrong. The silence of the woods wasn't natural. There were no crickets, no rustle of leaves. And then she heard it, a low mechanical hum coming from the trees. Not the wind, not the storm. A drone. Phase 4. Full collapse. A blinding white light suddenly erupted from the tree line, pinning Maya against the cabin wall like an insect on a board. "There she is," a voice shouted. It wasn't Sarah. It was a man's voice, amplified by a megaphone. "Maya Sterling, stay where you are. Put your hands in the air." Maya blinked, her vision swimming. Blue and red lights began to swirl at the edge of the clearing. Police cars, half a dozen of them. I'm here, Maya screamed, waving her arms. The woman inside, she's the one. She's Sarah Jenkins. But the officers didn't move toward the cabin. They moved toward her, their weapons drawn. We have the suspect in sight. A radio crackled, the sound carrying clearly in the damp air. She's attempted to flee the scene of the cyber theft. Proceed with caution. She's considered dangerous. Maya's world tilted. She looked back at the cabin. Sarah was standing in the window, her silhouette framed by the warm light of the kitchen. She wasn't hiding. She was holding a phone to her ear, her face a mask of grief. Yes, officer. Sarah's voice drifted out, loud enough for the body cams to catch. She just went crazy. She tried to kill me when I found the bank records. Please, just don't hurt her. She's my best friend. Maya realized with a sickening jolt that her smart escape had been the final piece of Sarah's plan. Sarah hadn't just locked her in. She had called the police the moment Maya touched the lock. The suicide note wasn't a note. It was a confession Sarah had sent to the local precinct from Maya's phone, timed to hit the moment she escaped. By breaking out, Maya had confirmed her guilt. She had fled a crime scene she hadn't committed. She wasn't the victim being rescued. She was the fugitive being caught. The tracking bug, the short circuit, the cleverness. It had all been factored into Sarah's ledger. Maya stood on the porch, the cold rain soaking through her clothes, realizing she had just walked herself directly into a prison cell. The handcuffs bit into Maya's wrists, the cold steel a harsh reality after months of digital fluff. Officer James Taylor, a man who smelled of peppermint and old coffee, led her toward the patrol car. He didn't look at her face. He looked at the ground, his thumb obsessively rubbing a smooth stone in his pocket. Pop, 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 pop. He cracked his knuckles, the sound like small gunfire in the quiet woods. I didn't do it, Maya whispered, her voice lost in the roar of the wind. Save it for the station, kid, Taylor said, his voice a flat monotone. The evidence is all there. The logs, the video, the confession you sent 10 minutes ago. You're lucky your friend called us before you did something you couldn't take back. Maya was shoved into the back of the cruiser. The plastic seat was hard and smelled of disinfectant. She watched through the rain-streaked window as Sarah stood on the porch, wrapped in a thick wool blanket provided by another officer. Sarah was crying, her shoulders shaking with grief. But as the cruiser began to pull away, she looked up. For 1 second, their eyes met. Sarah didn't look sad. She looked satisfied. She tilted her head to the left and gave a tiny, imperceptible nod. The journey to the station was a blur of sirens and shadows. Maya sat in the back, her mind a frantic machine. She thought of the Julian video. She thought of the bank accounts. Sarah was right. The digital world was a lie that looked like the truth. But Sarah had forgotten one thing. Sarah was physical. Maya looked down at her hand. In the struggle in the kitchen, when she had clawed at Sarah's arms, she hadn't just been fighting. She had been searching. She felt the small, hard lump in the lining of her own sleeve. The tracking chip. She had pulled it off Sarah's tablet during the fight and tucked it into her own clothes. It was still transmitting. And more importantly, her phone, the one the police had seized, was still synced to her cloud account. If she could get to a terminal, if she could show them the 1% shift in the deepfake's mouth, the way the lighting patterns in Julian's photos matched the specific LED flicker of Sarah's office. But as the cruiser pulled into the station lot, Maya saw the closed signs on the windows of the local shops, their lights blazing in the empty streets. The false comfort of the world was everywhere. The legal battle lasted 4 months. It was a grueling, soul-eroding process of depositions and digital forensics. Sarah had been thorough, but she wasn't a genius. She was an amateur playing with professional tools. The Julian deepfake was eventually torn apart by a specialist who found the original stock footage Sarah had used as a base. The confession email was traced back to a hidden VPN that Sarah had used from her own home network, a mistake she made in her haste to finish the game. The charges were dropped, but the damage was done. Maya Sterling was a name associated with a digital breakdown. Her freelance clients were gone. Her apartment was a memory. 6 months later, the heat of Austin, Texas, rose in shimmering waves off the pavement. It was a different kind of heat than Chicago. Dry, aggressive, and smelling of diesel and burnt rubber. Maya sat in a small coffee shop on 6th Street. The air inside was cool, smelling of dark roast and cinnamon. She didn't have a laptop. She didn't have a smartphone. She had a paperback book and a cup of black coffee. She looked at the sugar packets on the table. She began to count them, a habit she couldn't quite break. 1, 2, 3, 4, a voice said. Maya looked up. A man was standing by the table. He had messy hair and a shirt that was missing the bottom button. He looked like he wanted to bolt, his eyes darting toward the exit before returning to her. "Sorry," he said, his voice a bit rough. "I saw you counting. I do that too. Usually with the ceiling tiles." Maya looked at him, really looked at him. She didn't see a profile. She didn't see a curated aesthetic. She saw the way his hands shook slightly as he held his mug. She saw the genuine, awkward anxiety in his eyes. "Is this seat taken?" he asked, gesturing to the chair across from her. Maya felt the familiar pull of the void, the urge to retreat into the safety of a screen where she could edit her response until it was perfect. But then, she looked at the man's missing button. It was a flaw. A beautiful, physical, unedited flaw. "No," Maya said, her voice clear and resonant in the quiet shop. "It's not taken. I'm Maya." She reached out her hand, not to a screen, but to the air between them. David Miller took it. His skin was warm, his grip was a little too firm, and his palm was slightly sweaty. It was the most real thing Maya had ever felt. Outside, the Austin sun continued to beat down on the concrete, and the music from a nearby bar thrummed through the floorboards. The world was loud, messy, and unpredictable. But as Maya looked into David's eyes, she realized she finally had the focal point she had been searching for. The digital ghosts were gone, and for the first time in her life, Maya Sterling was fully, beautifully, in resolution. The end.